I never expected this little Saurian to play such a big role in Natlan. Sure, he wasn't part of the Archon quest, but his story touches every corner of Natlan's history, and that's just as important. And since our time in Natlan is finally coming to an end, I thought now would be a great time to look back over his quests and summarize everything that we've learned from them in one nice, neat little package. So that's what this video is gonna be. Now do note that there are two sides to the Little Buddy quests. On the one hand, we have all of the literal events of the quests themselves, and these are pretty short, straightforward, and easy to remember, but on the other hand, we have all of the lore, both optional and required, that came with the quests. They provide a lot of context, but they're not technically related to what's going on in the quests directly. But they're still critical points of information when it comes to understanding Natlan's history. And I wanna cover everything we can find in these quests. And I think the best way to do that is to tell the entire story of Natlan and the little guy chronologically. So we're going to be starting everything at the world's creation and then continuing forward in time until we reach the present day, where we'll shift gears and talk about the events of the little guy quests specifically. I really think the quest content will be easier to digest this way, so hopefully you agree. I've also done my best to keep this video as accurate as I possibly can, but I'm only human and Hoyo doesn't always fill in every blank, so just be aware that there could be mistakes or some slightly wrong assumptions somewhere. So make sure you check out the pinned comment when you're done watching this video, because that's where I'm going to be putting all of my corrections and my notes. I also want to quickly thank ATTRIBUTIONS for letting me use some clips from their upcoming Hoyo Fair animated short featuring Xbalanque and Ochkan. I'll leave a link in the description to the full animation once it releases on September 20th. Now, while this video is very retrospective, I'm betting that a lot of you are very excited to play through the latest region of Nod Krai, especially if you've been looking forward to new characters like Llama and Flynn's. I can't help you with the Nod Krai stuff yet, but Loot Bar can. Loot Bar is a third-party top-up site that offers safe and affordable ways to gift in-game currency to friends or for yourself. And they're also the sponsor of today's video. Now, I know a lot of people feel very anxious about using third-party top-up sites because they seem a little too good to be true, right? Surely those discounts come with a side effect of malware or something? I know this feeling very well because I've been there recently, and I'm very happy to report that after having tested many of these services, Loot Bar is definitely my top-up shop of choice. And I'm not just saying that because they're a sponsor. I used Loot Bar for my last giveaway, and I'll do it again because Loot Bar is both secure and reliable, and they have a 24/7 live chat support, nearly 25,000 excellent reviews on Trustpilot, and a full refund guarantee if something goes wrong with your transaction. Plus, they only use publicly available information like your user ID and server region to top up your account, so there's no login credentials required. And as an extra level of convenience, Loot Bar offers a handy pack bundling service for whales and dolphins. You don't have to buy each pack individually anymore. And as an additional bonus, Loot Bar takes advantage of regional pricing to get you those sweet, sweet discounts. Those can really add up, especially on larger purchases. And to celebrate the launch of Genshin Impact version Luna 1, Loot Bar is offering their all-in-one bundle at a special price. Plus, if you top up between September 10th and 17th, you can pick up an additional 3 coupons for even more tasty discounts. Limited time offer, see lootbar.gg for details. A big thanks to Loot Bar for sponsoring this video, and remember guys, discounts are awesome, but please spend responsibly. So, okay, well, we have a lot to cover, so let's cut the chatter and dig into it. Get it? Dig in? Because the little guy is a tepetlisaur? Okay, I'm just gonna start the video. When the world of Teyvat was born, a dragon was born alongside it. This dragon was called Nibelung, and you can think of him like the spirit or guardian god of the world. After his birth, many other dragons appeared across the globe, the most powerful of which became known as dragon sovereigns. Each sovereign ruled over both an aspect of the world at large and a geographic region, and also an element, but that's less important. The sovereign that we're most concerned about in this case, for this video, is Xuecoatl, the pyro sovereign of Natlan and caretaker of the world's phlogiston, which also is what gave birth to him. Phlogiston is a pretty important primordial substance, as it is apparently a type of atomic matter that you can encode with information. By using iridescent inscriptions as a programming language, phlogiston can run simple programs on a subatomic level. Now, depending on how it's programmed, phlogiston can replicate or simulate anything within the world of Teyvat. Its programmatic nature makes it the ideal substance to store information on. So sometimes you'll hear phlogiston called liquid knowledge, as dragons, bishops, and saurians are able to submerge themselves in phlogiston and read the iridescent inscriptions encoded on the phlogiston particles. This concept is pretty important, and it'll come up a few times later on. Now, on the same day that he was born, Xuecoatl molded his first creation from his own soul. This dragon was called Wahaklahun Ubakan, or alternatively, Kukulkan. And because he was the first creation, Xuequatl gave Kukulkan a special portion of the phlogiston. Xuequatl proceeded to establish the great city of Talon inside the volcano where he was born, and he populated it with many dragons. Among these Dragonborn were 13 Dragon Lord AIs who helped Xuequatl rule his territory of Natlantia, which is also the same thing as Natlan, so we're just gonna call it Natlan. Everything was going swimmingly in Teyvat and Natlan during this era of dragons, until one day, a space traveler named the Voyager met Nibelung and made him both curious and worried about what could be lurking in the depths of outer space. So he decided to investigate it for himself. But he couldn't leave the world unattended, so he raised 3 moons from the Earth to rule in his place while he was gone. He may have also left behind instructions for dragonkind to create a space program, so that eventually Nibelung could just take all the dragons into space. Now, the 3 moons that Nibelung left behind were ruled by 3 moon sisters, who the dragons considered to be their goddesses. And these goddesses had their own class of followers called the Seelies, or angels. And once again, everything was going pretty well for a time, until a reaver arrived from beyond Teyvat's borders and shook things up a bit. They forcibly seized control of the 3 moons and the sisters who governed them, then subjugated the Seelie race, declared themselves the Heavenly Principles, and then went to war against dragonkind with the help of 4 additional shades that they created. It's not quite clear if the Moon Sisters were coerced into helping the Reaver, or if they were forced into servitude, but nonetheless, dragonkind considered this shift in the Moon Sisters and Seelie's alliances, from their King Nibelung to this invader from beyond the sky, to be an unforgivable betrayal. And without Nibelung, the Moon Sisters, and the Seelies on their side, the dragons lost the war against the Heavenly Principles decisively. This is when the Heavenly Principles encased Xuequatl, the Pyro Sovereign, in lava, and then imprisoned him in the depths of the abyss. The dragons of Natlan retained somewhat of a hold over their territory, mostly because they were on the borders of Teyvat and the ley lines there were already pretty weak. But everywhere else, dragonkind just went into hiding or fled into the Dark Sea in order to escape this new world order imposed by the Heavenly Principles, a world of Seelies and humans. Now, part of the establishment of this new world order involved these celestial nails. Apparently, regions that were rich in primordial draconic substances like phlogiston created the holy soil phenomenon. In other words, an environment that was excellent for dragons but terrible for humankind, as it seems to make stuff like farming extremely difficult. So the celestial nails basically repress the primordial forces of the land and allow humans to thrive. And in Natlan, at least, this meant that phlogiston no longer proliferated the soil, and without phlogiston, the dragons began to lose access to their knowledge. You know, because phlogiston contains a lot of encrypted knowledge on it. Because of this and dragonkind's extremely powerful ability to adapt to their immediate environment, many dragons in Natlan began to devolve into the Saurian species. Saurians were still very powerful compared to humans, but far less threatening than their more evolved ancestors, partly because they were considered less intelligent. Knowledge is a kind of power, after all. In addition to the suppression of the holy soil, the Heavenly Principles established the current system of elements at this point. A quick note about this, though. The power of the elements seems to have been originally tied to the moons, as Kuvaki, or moon power, is identified as the original source of the elements as of the preview trailers we have for Nod Krai. This does make sense if you think of the elements as being related to different wavelengths of light, and you think of the moon's power as being the power of moonlight, which is the reflection of sunlight, and then Nibelung would be the sun reflecting his light on the moons that he made, you know? But this idea of Kuvaki being the more primordial form of the elements is kind of at odds with what the Lord of the Night says when she explains that the Heavenly Principles created the current system of elements based on phlogiston. Up until this point, we've just assumed that that meant that the elements were created from phlogiston. But I think there might be a slight misunderstanding of what role phlogiston played in the creation of the new elemental system. Because see, phlogiston is first and foremost a carrier of information, so it's not unreasonable to assume that the Heavenly Principles could read the information that was stored in the phlogiston, and that's how they figured out how the Kuvaki worked, and how they managed to create a new system of elements based on that same information. One of the main reasons I'm favoring Kuvaki as the source of elemental energy, like the original one, is because the Moon Sisters granted their followers elemental mastery through the use of moon wheels, which turned out to be some kind of prototype visions, and visions are what we use to manipulate the elements. The pieces fit a bit nicer than they do with phlogiston, so I think phlogiston carried more like information on how the whole system worked, and then the Heavenly Principles just use that information to modify the world to their liking, you know. Hey, future Ashikai here! This video was written and recorded with the intention of releasing before Nod Krai, so now that I've actually had time to both play the new region and mull things over a little bit, I have another hypothesis here. This will contain Nod Krai spoilers, so skip to the timestamp on screen if you don't want those. So right now, the power of Kuvaki plays off the concept of polarity and duality, and it represents it through magnetism. Now, Columbina, being the avatar of the Frost Moon, also has two states, both blue and red, similar to a magnet's north and south pole. And as far as primordial dragon substances go, we only have two. We've got phlogiston and the primordial sea, and they are red and blue respectively. So my new hypothesis is that Kuvaki might be something like a fusion of both phlogiston and the primordial sea. Phlogiston is data, and the primordial sea is kind of like raw material. Now, why that would behave like electromagnetism, I don't know, but this theory would explain why elements are closely tied to both phlogiston and Kuvaki. I would not have made this connection if it wasn't for this one quest on Hisi Island, where you unlock Columbina's birthplace. The locking mechanism references Shweequatl by name, and it's very reminiscent of a vinyl record. But if it is referencing Shweequatl, you would expect it to use phlogiston since that was his domain, it was over phlogiston, but instead it uses Kuvaki. Again, this is a theory, I just thought it was worth mentioning. Back to past me. Anyway, at some point during his absence, Nibelung's space-traveling friend, the Voyager, returned to Teyvat, and they were distressed to find the world conquered by an outsider. So they descended into the world, formed an alliance with one of the Seelies, and incited a rebellion against the heavenly principles. Around this same time, Nibelung returned to Teyvat and tried to use forbidden knowledge that he found in the depths of the abyss to overturn heaven's new ruler, with many dragons joining in on this great war of vengeance, including Shweequatl, who escaped his prison of lava in the abyss. This war appears to have destroyed the moons, decimated the Seelie population, and obliterated the landscape with abyssal power, forcing the heavenly principles to mend the land again with their celestial nails. Natlan's ley lines were severely damaged and unable to be repaired with a celestial nail, so one of the surviving Seelies, Juhalt Tekutin, aka the Lord of the Night, followed the instructions of Renova, the Shade of Death, and used her own body to convert the fractured ley lines into the Night Kingdom. Despite their incredible losses during the Great War of Vengeance and the death of the Dragon King Nibelung himself, Natlan remained a sort of stronghold for dragonkind, at least for a time, because their sovereign didn't escape the war unscathed either. All that time Shweequatl spent locked in the abyss made him corrupted and unstable, with only brief bouts of clarity that grew shorter every day. So Kukulkan Khan took up the responsibility of leading the dragons in his brother's place, becoming the acting regent of Natlan. But not all the losses were on the dragon side. The heavenly principles also took some serious damage and lost a portion of their power over the world during the conflict. And that power required some kind of replacement, so with the help of a mysterious second descender, whose identity we don't know, the heavenly principles split the third descender, whose identity we also don't know, into the 7 Gnosis. These Gnosis were to be given to one worthy candidate from each nation, and those who received a Gnosis would become an Archon. Now, how would you prove your worthiness? By fighting all of the gods and dragons in your nation, and surviving, of course. So this marked the start of the Archon War. Now, because the dragons were so prolific in Natlan, there were very few, if any, gods who could challenge the dragons and seize the position for themselves. And that included Seelies. There was only one Seelie, and she was already bound to the ley lines. Plus, most humans in Natlan lived in the shadows of the dragons, so their settlements were small and scattered. They didn't exactly have a lot of firepower to fight back with. So dragons were able to maintain control over Natlan for the most part. The same could not be said for the other regions of Teyvat. Now, Shweequatl believed the power of the abyss to be the true plight of dragonkind, so he used his ever-shortening moments of clarity to develop a weapon that could destroy the abyss for good. This weapon was called Huitzilopochtli, and it was more of a last resort than a first line of defense, as the weapon wasn't without its drawbacks. Once activated, Huitzilopochtli would ignite the entire world in order to extract its information and destroy it in the process. Then the device would encode that information onto phlogiston, thus creating perfect replicas of pure phlogiston. And once all life on Teyvat was converted into pure phlogiston, everything would merge into a singular existence without birth, death, or suffering, and the abyss wouldn't be able to reach them either. Once Huitzilopochtli was complete, Shweequatl removed one of his eyes and turned it into the device's control hub. The act severely weakened him, but because he was so heavily corrupted by the abyss, there was a need for a means through which someone else could control the device. So yeah, this was the dragon's original plan to defeat the Abyss, should no other options reveal themselves. But I do think the decision makers are a little bit biased here, because Natlan was governed by 13 Dragon Lords in addition to the Sovereign and Kukulkan, and those Dragon Lords were AIs born of phlogiston. So a phlogiston-based existence was already familiar to them. Now Kukulkan was the acting regent of that time, and he was not a phlogiston-based AI, so he was rightly horrified at the prospect of this entire plan, and he wanted to find a more reasonable solution to save his people and potentially the rest of the world. And with a little time, he discovered a new possibility existing within the human race. See, the actions of the heavenly principles and the loss of the holy soil seems to have cut off the path of evolution for dragons, which forces them into an evolutionary dead end, meaning they can no longer truly adapt to their environment in a way that would become conducive to existing alongside the Abyss or even defeating it. Humans, on the other hand, were not subject to having their evolutionary paths prematurely truncated, so if he could figure out a way to blend dragons and humans into a new species entirely, humans could potentially gain the wisdom and power of dragons, while dragons would regain their ability to evolve, and together they'd have a greater ability to resist the Abyss. It seems as though the key to this idea could be found in how the heavenly principles managed to convert the ley lines into an anti-abyss barrier. But Kukulkan isn't really clear on the mechanics of his plan, so I don't know that for sure. I don't really know how that would work. What we do know is that the early stages of his plan required developing some method for humans to wield phlogiston, since phlogiston was closely tied to dragonkind's knowledge and power. He strongly believed that humankind would use this power to build grand civilizations like the dragons once had. That would set humans on the same sort of path that the dragons had been on before the heavenly principles cut off their pathway of evolution. So that was the first part of his plan. To make this happen, Kukulkan befriended a human named Cha'ak, and he taught him all he could using a crystal of refined phlogiston known as pyrophosphorite, which is essentially just a dragon's scale. This one in particular seems to have been stolen from Shweekwaddle's body. Now Cha'ak acted as a sort of liaison between Kukulkan and the other humans around Toyak Springs, so he was the one who was teaching other humans how to use phlogiston. To attract as many humans as possible, Kukulkan lifted chunks of the land in the area into the sky to form the upper sanctum, which could be seen from very, very far away. Humans who indulged their curiosity and traveled to Toyak Springs would eventually develop a settlement and learn how to use phlogiston from Cha'ak. At some point, Cha'ak and Kukulkan appear to have had a falling out of sorts, and then they went their separate ways. It's not clear as to why they fell out, but it's very possible that it was because humans with knowledge of phlogiston had no interest in developing an advanced civilization, and instead, they used their power for acts of war and violence. This was not the result that Kukulkan wanted, so he vanished in order to reevaluate his plans. Without guidance from Kukulkan, Cha'ak and his fellow humans sought guidance from the Lord of the Night, who was a Seelie and thus someone Kukulkan disliked because of the whole Moons and Seelies betrayed dragonkind fiasco. This eventually led to more permanent established settlements across Natlan. Near the end of Cha'ak's life, he allegedly climbed to the top of a tall mountain, maybe Tolan, maybe Ochka Natlan, and lit a torch with a phlogiston-derived flame. Now this appears to have created a sort of link between Natlan and the Night Kingdom, allowing the people of Natlan to hear the sounds of the first Wayab being born. These Wayab would become the guardian spirits of each tribe that Cha'ak helped establish, and they would come to play a very important role later on. Even though the results from the first part of his experiment wasn't what he expected, Kukulkan had still proven out his theory that humans could be made to be compatible with phlogiston before he parted ways with Cha'ak. And that meant there was still hope. So while the human tribes were busy mastering their newfound powers, Kukulkan moved on to phase 2 of his plan, which involved properly fusing humans and dragons together, or at least prototyping it. Kukulkan had this hypothesis that a child born of both humans and dragons would be the perfect candidate to unite both species politically, socially, and culturally because they would accept and understand both species. But for this to be possible, the child would need to be accepted by both humans and dragons. Gaining the acceptance of dragons was very simple. They'd just need to defeat Shweekwaddle in battle and seize his throne. Then the dragons would bow before him unquestioningly because that's just how they do things. Gaining the trust of humans, on the other hand, would take much longer, so Kukulkan Khan intended for this child to both look human and for them to be raised among them. And so, Kukulkan Khan set about creating this child by placing the soul of a human into the body of a dragon, and the result was his son, Ochkan. As an infant, Ochkan was kept in the bishop nests until he proved himself to be a promising candidate for Kukulkan Khan's plans. Fortunately, Ochkan exhibited the power and strength of a dragon by outcompeting the bishops for food, but also the altruism and compassion of a human by sharing his food with the other bishops. By the other dragon standards, Ochkan was considered a, quote, surplus entity unfit for dragonhood because he showed emotions like fear and compassion. Surplus implies that there could have been other kids like him, and it doesn't sound like they were treated particularly well. Or maybe those other kids were just bishops. It's just that the way the experiment log reads, Ochkan may have been really afraid of what he saw the dragons doing to the others in his nests, whether they were like him or just bishops. And so he attempted to escape the nests, and he succeeded. Now, I have to make a couple of assumptions here because this part of Ochkan's life is not elaborated on in any texts that I could find, and it certainly wasn't elaborated on in the Little Guy quests. So my assumption is that while Ochkan was deemed a failure by the other dragons, he was the perfect result for Kukulkan Khan's purposes, especially since he bore the mark of the Flame Lord, another name for Shweekwaddle. This is the same mark that Little Buddy has, so we can probably think of this as like a mark of royal lineage. For those reasons, I think that after Ochkan escaped the nest, Kukulkan Khan caught him and reported him dead so that the other dragons wouldn't continue to search for him. Then Kukulkan Khan would be free to do whatever he wanted with him. Now we know that Kukulkan Khan intended for his perfect candidate for dragon-human fusion to be raised among the humans, and we know that Xbalanque showed Ochkan great compassion at some point and allegedly rescued him from a dragon prison. But because there are no records or hints of Xbalanque invading Tulin to get Ochkan, we can assume that Xbalanque was not responsible for Ochkan's initial escape. But he could have been involved in the aftermath. See, I think that Kukulkan Khan sought out Xbalanque and asked him to take care of Ochkan after the whole escape fiasco. This sounds like a bizarre idea, but keep in mind that according to the priestess's records, Xbalanque called himself the successor of Cha'ak, and Cha'ak was once friends with Kukulkan Khan, so Kukulkan Khan seeking out the successor of his one human friend seems like a reasonable thing to happen. Plus, like I said, Kukulkan Khan also wanted Ochkan to be raised by humans and to grow up to be a powerful warrior capable of killing the now abyss-corrupted Shweekwaddle so that he could obtain the divine throne of Pyro. Xbalanque was a very powerful warrior, so he would make the best trainer and caretaker for someone like Ochkan. This arrangement doesn't seem like it would benefit Xbalanque all that much, except that if Kukulkan Khan was willing to help Xbalanque, overturn the throne of the dragons, then that already benefits him because then humans don't have to live under the shadow of dragons anymore. So all in all, it wouldn't be a bad deal, but it's not exactly confirmed. Like I said, this part was just my conjecture based on the information we have. Now, regardless of whether the particulars of my assumptions are correct here, it is a fact that Xbalanque became the friend and caretaker of Ochkan, and over time, their friend group grew to include a whole cast of characters like Hapub, Ichquik, Lianka, Maghan, Uenuku, and Yupankui. Sorry for butchering the names. Now, every single one of these friends of Xbalanque and Ochkan went on to become the leaders of their respective tribes, except for Uenuku. I mean, it's possible that Uenuku became the tribal leader, but it's actually very unclear. As far as I could tell, it was never confirmed anywhere. At the very least, though, we should consider him an important representative of the people of the Springs. Now, with the help of his companions, Xbalanque was able to unify the tribes of Natlan under a single banner by winning countless battles against the dragons. It did help that Ochkan was able to take advantage of his draconic lineage and decipher iridescent inscriptions, because he could use those as weapons against the dragons that he hated, which gave them a very significant advantage on the battlefield. And this is kind of where Kukulkan Khan's plans with Ochkan went a bit awry, because Ochkan had grown up to really hate dragons and he really liked humans. Not exactly the best attitude for a figure who's supposed to unify two species, is it? Anyway, once the human tribes were united, Xbalanque set his sights on Tulin. He intended to challenge the corrupted Pyro Sovereign and claim a decisive victory in this war against the dragons. Now, one of the reasons I suggested that Kukulkan Khan sought out Xbalanque's help earlier is because I suspect that Kukulkan Khan may have had a hand in helping Xbalanque's army infiltrate Tulin so that Ochkan would be able to slay Shweekwaddle and become the next Pyro Sovereign. There isn't much evidence for this, apart from the fact that it would be in Kukulkan's best interest to do so, but it's very possible he did not assist them at all. Talon's defenses were already pretty weak due to a really bad abyssal infestation, so it is very possible that Xbalanque's army just forced their way in. But regardless of how they got in, we do know that Xbalanque's army ripped through what was left of Talon's defenses until at last, Xbalanque came face to face with the mindless Xuequatl himself. The two were evenly matched, but Xbalanque got the upper hand when he stabbed Xuequatl in the eye with his spear, cleaving it into 2 pieces. That upper hand didn't last for long though, because the two of them immediately plummeted to their death from the top of the volcano. Both man and dragon died in the fall, but Xbalanque was revived from the flames of the Pyro Sovereign's heart, and he walked away unscathed, and with the divine throne of Pyro in hand. I'm a little unclear on the exact timing of this, but I think because this was the moment where Xbalanque died and was reborn, this was also the same moment at which Renova, the Shade of Death, appeared before him and showed him what sort of future was in store for his people. Because, you know, the whole resurrection in Natlan thing is attributed to her, so that would make sense if she had some involvement with him being revived here, or at least maybe she just delayed his death. Whatever the case, she showed him visions of a hopeless future where all life had been devoured by the abyss, and this future was inevitable, unless Xbalanque could come up with some sort of ingenious plan to defeat it. Fortunately, Xbalanque did have an idea. In the same way that he was about to inherit the special name of Habarim as a symbol of his status, role, and power as an Archon, he could establish a similar system for the rest of Natlan. Basically, people with the right qualities would be selected by the Wyeb of the Night Kingdom to receive an ancient name. And those with an ancient name could participate in a selection process, the Pilgrimage for the Return of the Sacred Flame, and the winners of this selection process would earn the right to fight against the Abyss in the Night Warden Wars. And with just a little assistance from the Shade of Death herself, if even one person returned from the Night Warden Wars victorious, they would be able to be revived using Renova's Ode of Resurrection. Now you might be wondering why this plan would even work. Because the Night Warden Wars are just like a one-on-one against like pieces of the Abyss, never really the entire thing, so this doesn't really seem like it would obliterate the whole abyssal threat facing Natlan. And it's equally unclear as to how Xbalanque even came up with this system in the first place. But I think the answer to both of those things lies in Huitzilopochtli. Yes, this is a little bit of a theory, but hear me out. Huitzilopochtli possesses the ability to convert everything in the world into information encoded on phlogiston, and according to this little secret source serpent, among others, information is energy and energy is information. Or to put it another way, knowledge is power. Or if you're in Fontaine, Francis Bacon. Because Sir Francis Bacon said knowledge itself is power. Never mind, I'm moving on. Ancient names are effectively a system wherein a substrate, or in this case the obsidian feather, is engraved with the stories of every person it belongs to. The more stories or information the ancient name accumulates, the more power it has. So in theory at least, with enough time, ancient names would be able to accrue enough information to annihilate the abyss in a similar manner to how Huitzilopochtli does. Now, ancient names tend to be granted to those with similar predispositions to the original name bearer, which kind of suggests that the story of each name bearer repeats or at least rhymes with the stories of the name bearers that precede them. So I suspect that the reason why Cha'ak and Xbalanque have so many instances where their personal stories overlap is because they actually share an ancient name, Kiangozi. They didn't at first, obviously, because Cha'ak predates the ancient name system, but since Xbalanque considers himself the successor of Cha'ak, he was likely unknowingly pioneering this whole ancient name system by walking a similar path to his predecessor and reinforcing the basis of his own story. Is this confirmed anywhere? No, but I think the idea is really cool and would work really well to explain how Xbalanque came up with the ancient name system and his weird similarities with Cha'ak, all in one nice little package. And it's not even that weird to assume that Xbalanque had knowledge of Huitzilopochtli because its control hub was the Eye of Xuequatl, and taking advantage of that eye was how Xbalanque beat the Sovereign. Now, my personal theories aside, this was not how Kukulkan intended for things to play out, okay? Ochkan was supposed to defeat the Sovereign, not Xbalanque. This turn of events was not only completely unforeseen, but it also totally ruined Kukulkan's original plans. So it was time for him to improvise a bit. At this point in time, Kukulkan did not want to activate Huitzilopochtli, so he approached Xbalanque and struck a deal with him. The specifics of this deal are not super clear, but what we do know is that they both agreed to keep half of Xuequatl's eye, the Golden Entreaties, so that Huitzilopochtli could not be activated at all. During this time, Kukulkan would be entrusting the whole defeating the Abyss and finding a new future for humans and dragons mission thing to Xbalanque. But If Ochkon should fail in his mission to unite humans and dragons, or if Xbalanque failed to unite humans in the fight against the Abyss, then Kukulkan reserved the right to reclaim the Golden Entreaties and activate Huitzilopochtli. With the agreement made, the two parted ways, and Xbalanque led his people to the ruined dragon city of Chichen Uktoka, upon which they would construct a brand new city for humans, a symbol of Natlan's newfound unity, the city of Ochkanatlan. Now keep in mind that this all happened during the Archon War, and since there were no gods in Natlan, just dragons, and the dragons were defeated by Xbalanque, Xbalanque was basically the winner of the war, and he was the one to receive the Pyronosis and ascend to the seat of God. Now I touched on this earlier, but it is theorized that Renova delayed Xbalanque's death when he fought Xuequatl. But a delay is just that, a delay. Xbalanque still owes her his life. So not long after his ascension into Archonhood, he appears to have offered himself up as a human sacrifice to Renova by walking into the Sacred Flame, entrusting Ochkon with protecting the people of Natlan in his place and upholding the pledge he made with Kukulkan, at least until the next human Archon appeared. But there was just one problem with leaving Ochkon in charge of everything. Ochkon revered Xbalanque so greatly that he had no will to see another Archon. To him, there was no god but Xbalanque. The new city of Ochkanatlan was supposed to be the symbol of Natlan's unity, and as such it was home to the Grand Alliance, which is exactly what it sounds like, a committee that oversees the alliance of all tribes in Natlan as well as this new capital city of Ochkanatlan, with Ochkon serving as its leader, or king. Things were going pretty okay for a while, but trouble began brewing once Ochkon really started flexing his leader status. See, part of the deal between Kukulkan and Xbalanque that Ochkon was supposed to uphold because Xbalanque entrusted it to him was to create a world where dragons and humans could peacefully coexist. With most of the old dragons dead, sealed, or in retreat, this deal kind of only applied to Saurians, so Ochkanatlan was supposed to be a city for humans and Saurians to coexist peacefully in. But as you may recall, Ochkon hated dragons and greatly favored humans, so it didn't take long before he began persecuting anyone who was sympathetic to dragons or Saurians. And because he had convinced himself that Xbalanque was the only god that humans would ever need, he also forbade the people from following the Lord of the Night. His choices will lead to consequences. Now remember, Ochkanatlan was built atop the ruins of the dragon city of Chichen Uktoka, which initially belonged to the 9th Dragon Lord. During an excavation expedition beneath the city, Ochkon found the 9th Lord submerged in a very deep well. It was around this time that one of Ochkon's former companions, Lianka, the leader of the Flowerfeather clan, withdrew from the Grand Alliance, citing Ochkon's blatant abuses of power as her main reason. And because of this, she also refused to supply any more workers from her clan to assist with the excavation, which led to the even worse treatment of the current workers. Now, Lianka had actually been adopted and raised by the 8th Dragon Lord, so she was actually very sympathetic to dragonkind and disapproved of Ochkon's actions as a whole. This was actually one of the reasons why the 11th Dragon Lord approached her. The 11th Lord's consciousness had been split into two, one hostile towards humans and the other merely longing for a new home now that Natlan no longer belonged to the dragons. The hostile side tried to trick Lianka into sealing the more compassionate side, but Lianka saw through this ruse and eventually sealed the 11th Lord's hostile side instead and gave the other side a moon wheel that used to belong to the 8th Lord, her mother, to serve as part of her core on her journey to find a new home. The 11th Lord would then wander to that for 2,000 years before Aina would find her in Nod Krai and give her both a new mechanical body and a new name, Inefa, which is a really funny name to me in context because Ochkanatlan is often called the Ineffable City. Although outside of the loose ties to Lianka, Ochkanatlan doesn't actually have any relationship with the 8th or 11th Dragon Lords, just the 9th. This city belonged to the 9th Dragon Lord. And speaking of which, Ochkon did manage to finish excavating the well regardless of Lianka's resistance, and he managed to wake the 9th Dragon Lord. Surprisingly, she was quite fond of Ochkon at first, recognizing him as Kukulkan's son and part of his plan to unite human and dragon kind. So she shared information with him freely, whether it be about the Dragon Space Program, the fall of the 3 moons, or the secrets of how her city functioned. Now, while the 9th Dragon Lord was very fond of Ochkon hated the 9th Dragon Lord. The stories she told him only solidified his belief that the dragons should be eradicated entirely. Unfortunately for him, he needed her alive for the time being because the city's functions could only be operated by her power. So he trapped her inside of the old core of Chu-Ulel and forced her to power the city until he could find an alternative. And this of course made her very angry, so she resisted him and grew more and more difficult to control over time, forcing Ochkon to find a new solution way ahead of schedule. Through his research, Ochkon realized that theoretically, anyone with dragon blood or lineage could operate or power the machinery in the city. And since he knew of his own origins, of him being half dragon and all that, he decided to split himself into two parts, a human part and a dragon part. The dragon part would be imprisoned in the new core of Chu-Ulel so it could power the city indefinitely, while the human part, I don't know if he really had a good plan for. Before he went through with his plan, he imprisoned the Ninth Lord in a statue beneath the city and split her heart into 3 pieces. Now, Kukulkan had apparently maintained some level of contact with his son over time and was very, very disappointed in him. He'd not only violated the pact made between Kukulkan and Xbalanque by persecuting the dragons, but he'd also released the abyss from beneath the city due to his careless excavations of the Ninth Lord. Yeah, I didn't really get to mention that part. But let's just say that his human subjects were not happy about the current state of affairs. And dissent was growing louder by the day. Ochkon's choices had created a massive rift of ideals within the alliance, and it was starting to create some internal conflict. A scarlet-eyed boy from the Flowerfeather clan, who was very sympathetic towards the Saurians, started leading a rebellion against Ochkon's empire. Those who sympathized with the Saurians fought alongside these rebels, while those who didn't sided with Ochkon and his army. One of Ochkon's friends, Yupankwi, sided with these rebels, eventually stealing the Sacred Flame's turnfire from Ochkon and lighting both the army and himself on fire. That fire burned right through the ground and landed in the Night Kingdom, where it still burns to this day. So on the one hand, betrayal and death. On the other hand, misunderstanding and death, because another one of his friends, Apub, accidentally killed his sister Ichquik over a disagreement about the treatment of Saurians before burning himself alive out of grief. And these are just a couple of incidents that happened. Things just were not going very well for Ochkon. Or Kukulkan for that matter, because Kukulkan believed that his plan had failed and this was evidence. So as per his contract with Xbalanque, Kukulkan planned to seize the Second Golden Entreaty and then use it to activate Huitzilopochtli, just like Xuecoatl had said he would all those years ago. But Ochkon had hidden the Golden Entreaty upon the Tonatia, and he refused to tell Kukulkan where it was. And to add insult to injury, Ochkon had also destroyed all of Huitzilopochtli's broadcast towers, hoping to at least diminish its reach if it was activated. Now, this act was actually pretty pointless because even fragments of the towers were able to serve the same purpose as the entire tower. It wouldn't be impossible for Kukulkan to go find the Golden Entreaty himself, but he decided to humor his son's rebellious actions one more time and then left, promising to return for his soul upon his death. Meanwhile, the scarlet-eyed boy and leader of the rebellion sought guidance from the Lord of the Night and traveled to the Night Kingdom. There, he carved out his heart with a dagger and offered himself up in sacrifice to the Sacred Flame the same way Xbalanque did. And in the process, he became the second Pyro Archon. Don't ask me how this works, I have no idea. But when he returned from the Night Kingdom alive, the people rallied around him in great numbers. Ochkon knew at that moment that he was losing and decided to go through with his plan to split himself in two. This way, at least his dragon half would fall to the humans. Yeah, he really hated dragons so much that he wanted his dragon half to suffer at the hands of humans. Now, I'm not quite sure why the next part plays out the way it does, but instead of imprisoning his dragon side inside of the new core of Chu-Ulel, it seems as though Ochkon sealed his human side inside of the core and left his body on the outside, and his body was supposed to be the more draconic part. I think this is because his body was heavily corrupted by the leaking abyssal energy, and in his last moments he wanted to fight off the abyssal forces inside of the heart of the city. He was only met with moderate success here, and he eventually fell to the new Pyro Archon's blade. His human soul would remain inside of the new core of Chu-Ulel until a woman named Bana would unseal it thousands of years later and give him the new name of Kokoik. And with Ochkon's death, the Grand Alliance finally collapsed, and the once great city of Natlan was abandoned as its abyssal infection could no longer be cleansed. But Kukulkan didn't plan on just twiddling his thumbs and waiting for things to happen. He actually returned to Natlan at some point to warp what was left of Ochkon's body into something more draconic, which meant that he wasn't truly dead, but he was kind of mindless, and he's just spent the next 100 or 1,000 years or so flying around Natlan, guarding the place and serving Kukulkan's purpose of being an evil dragon of a legend. because this marked the start of Kukulkan's next experiment. A second attempt at an Ochkan, if you will. So this experiment began with the legend written by Kukulkan. The legend said that every so often, a Saurian would be born with the mark of the Flame Lord's blessing, just like Ochkan had. This mark would grant the Saurian so much power that it would eventually drive the Saurian mad and transform them into a dangerous dragon, like Ochkan. The only way to remove this mark was for the blessed Saurian to find a human companion and journey together to the sacred mountain of Tulin. This human-dragon pair would be called the Chosen of Dragons. Now, the point of this legend was twofold. On the one hand, Kukulkan would be able to test how plausible human and Saurian coexistence was by putting the pair through trials that he would oversee by borrowing the forms of humans that Ochkan had devoured over time. Don't ask me how that works. It seems as though Kukulkan is taking the souls of the humans that Ochkan eats or defeats and then using them as masks or really, really weird Halloween costumes. I don't really want to think about it. On the other hand, if a marked Saurian managed to locate both golden entreaties which were required to unlock the sealed city of Tulin, which is inside of the sacred mountain that they had to travel to, then Kukulkan would allow that Saurian to decide whether or not the world should be turned into phlogiston by Huitzilopochtli, or decide if the current path that they were on was worth continuing. And that brings us up to the modern day. Because of this legend, someone had found a young tepetlisaur with the Flame Lord's blessing and locked them inside of a phlogiston prison until a worthy human companion could be found for them. This Saurian is our little buddy, and that companion is, of course, the Traveler. After gaining the ability to indwell inside of a Saurian, which is a mystery that we're not going to talk about at all in this video because I don't want to think about it, the Traveler frees the little one from their prison and begins their journey through Natlan. Shortly after meeting, we run into Kukulkan borrowing the form of a human named Manku. Now, while Manku says he's from the Saurian Relic Association, Manku is actually the name of the brother of a man named Taidu who died 500 years ago. Now, it is possible that Taidu is the same as this Taidu, but if that's the case, then this Taidu is basically the ghost of that Taidu, according to this conversation with him. Which is entirely possible because, like I said, Kukulkan appears to be taking on all of these forms of dead people because he has their souls because Ochkan ate them. Again, I don't really know how this works. Don't think about it too deeply. Anyway, while posing as Manku, Kukulkan tells us about the legend of the Flame Lord's blessing and says that if we want to save our little buddy from an early grave, we're gonna need to find the 2 golden entreaties and journey to the volcano of Tulin. And we're also gonna need permission from the chief of the Children of Echoes in order to get started. Permission's easy to get. We just have to best Pakal in a fight and he'll give us a talisman carved in the shape of Xbalanque and Kukulkan's faces as a reward. This talisman is the key to opening some old ruins Kukulkan takes us to. These ruins lead to the Hall of Parting Vows where we find the mural of Kukulkan and Xbalanque each holding a golden entreaty. There are 2 paths in this ruin, one path for the human and one for the Saurian, and you can only get to the end of the paths by working together. But at the end of their respective paths, the Traveler and our little buddy are shown very different murals of important historical events. The little guy is shown a mural of Xbalanque killing Xuiquatl, while the Traveler is shown a mural of the abyss-corrupted Dragon King Nibelung attacking the ley lines and destroying an angel during the Great War of Vengeance. The purpose of these murals is not just educational, but it's also to sow distrust between the human and the Saurian here. But it doesn't work on our little guy or the Traveler. They are still best buddies. So together they make their way down a golden staircase into what feels like the center of the earth to face Kukulkan's final trial, a fight against a golden wolf lord, which is a weird choice when you think about it. And during the battle, the little guy goes Super Saiyan, and our reward for beating the Golden Wolf Lord is our first golden entreaty. 1 down, 1 to go. Now, on the way to get the second entreaty, the one Ochkan hid in Natlan, there are actually 3 optional trials you can complete. And yes, each one is still operated by Kukulkan. He's a good scientist, and every good scientist oversees their experiments personally. So if you go to the ancestral temple behind the Scions of the Canopy, you'll meet Legba, someone we also see in Ochkan's memories of 500 years ago. So we can assume that this is actually another disguise of Kukulkan, and another human soul being devoured. We even see him break character briefly. On this leg of the quest, our little buddy gets a little too excited and steals an obsidian stone statue from inside of the temple, which could anger the Wayab that lives there, so it's pretty important that we return the statue to where the little guy found it. But when we do, we're forced to fight a manifestation of the Wayab, and upon victory, we're transported to the Night Kingdom, where a consciousness stored in the obsidian tablet tells us straight up that Kukulkan is not trustworthy and that we shouldn't do what he wants. Now, because the Y up here is talking about the Sacred Mountain, we can assume that their biggest issue with Kukulkan is the fact that he kinda wants to activate Huitzilopochtli now. And based on what we know about the device, yeah, that's a pretty fair warning. So one ominous warning later, we are off to the next stop, which is Tequamecan Valley, where we meet Taidu, who is once again Kukulkan in disguise. Probably. He tends to break character a lot here, but like in really funny ways, like in this instance where he's talking to the little one like he can perfectly understand what he's saying, and then he vehemently denies it. Now, Taidu is supposed to be a storyteller trying to create a new legend to record the history of the Shadow Pins. The myth of this area says that the Shadow Pins were once used to pin down the volcano lord that was terrorizing the region 500 years ago during the Conrian Cataclysm, but the real story is that the volcano lord was likely an abyssal mimic of a dragon, kind of like this guy, and that's what was terrorizing the area instead. If it actually is Gosoithoth pretending to be Shweekwaddle again, then that's super funny because technically Shweekwaddle is the volcano lord because, you know, he was born in a volcano. Anyway, apparently 2 Conrian soldiers were trying to fend off the Volcano Lord on their own, and they were losing ground really quickly during the Cataclysm. Fortunately, the Children of Echoes and their tepetlisaurs managed to fashion 4 pins made out of solid phlogiston that could seal the abyssal mimic underground. These shadow pins were the only way to defeat the Volcano Lord. So with no other options, the 2 Conrian soldiers acted as bait and lured the Volcano Lord underground, knowing full well they wouldn't survive. The Children of Echoes sealed the Volcano Lord and the Conrians underground with the shadow pins. But no seal lasts forever, and after 500 years, this one's a little bit loose. So it's up to us and the little guy to reset the pins by forcing the iridescent inscriptions back into the solid phlogiston. But the final pin and seal fell underground, and that's where we find the ghosts of the 2 Conrian soldiers still trapped in an eternal fight against the abyss in their minds. The least we can do is to lay them to rest for good, so we do. And then we're once again warped to the Night Kingdom, where a ghost cat thanks us for returning the lost souls to where they belong, and they leave us with another vague warning about Kukulkan's plans. There's just one last stop to make before we go to Natlan, and that's Hanan Pacha, aka the Upper Sanctum in Toyak Springs. Here we meet a woman named Chikya, who, shockingly, is probably not Kukulkan in disguise. I couldn't find her name in any historical record, so it's very likely that Kukulkan never intended for the Chosen of Dragons to come here. Still, this is the place where Kukulkan and Cha'ak began teaching humans about phlogiston, so it's a great place to learn a bit more about phlogiston engravings. Luckily, this is Chikya's area of expertise. She's one of the rare people in Natlan who can't use phlogiston due to an injury that involves the abyss, and because of that, she spent a lot of time researching everything there is to know about phlogiston and phlogiston engraving. And that includes the history of it, which we've kind of already gone over earlier in this video, so I'm just gonna skip it. So we make our way through some underground ruins, then take a spirit way up to the Upper Sanctum, hoping to find something that can cure Chikya's condition and let her wield phlogiston for herself. But all we find is a pillar which tells us that we've completed one of Kukulkan's trials. Probably one of the ones that was used to teach humans how to use phlogiston from ages ago, and not one meant for the whole Chosen of Dragons thing. Chikya isn't cured, but that's okay. She's happy as she is. Now, there are obviously a lot of tiny side quests for the little guy, but I'm gonna ignore them because they're mostly little bonding moments between the traveler Paimon and the little one, and they are adorable, but they're not plot relevant, unfortunately. So that means it's finally time to visit Natlan so that we can get the second Golden Entreaty. Upon arriving at the ruins of the city, we encounter what's left of Ochkan, who is very keen on keeping us out of the city. While hiding from his barrage of fireballs, we discover some important notes left behind from an unknown adventurer. Well, I say unknown, but we meet their author immediately afterwards. Her name is Bana, and she's either a ghost or Kukulkan in disguise. I'm honestly not sure which. I think it's the former. Either way, Bana is a character from 500 years ago. At that time, she had gone adventuring in Natlan looking for something called the Jade of Return, a relic rumored to be able to completely obliterate the abyss. Her father, Taika, and his friends Legba and Taidu, remember them, went missing when she was still a newborn while searching for the Jade of Return, which doesn't exist, by the way. This was just a legend fabricated by Kukulkan, and he based the legend on what Huitzilopochtli is supposed to do, while omitting the whole thing about turning all life on the planet into phlogiston-based life forms. Listen, I said he was a good scientist. I didn't say he was an ethical scientist. Anyway, during Bana's original adventure, because remember, the Bana that we meet is technically dead and has been for at least 400 years, Bana stumbled upon the heart of Chuulel and freed Ochkan's human mind from it. It then took the shape of a little blue spirit, which she named Kokoweek. While she was alive, Bana eventually learned the truth about the Jade of Return. It's not actually a relic that can tame the abyss. Instead, she believes it to be a hazardous relic, something that brings disaster. This is why I said the Jade of Return was likely based on the Golden Entreaty, because the Golden Entreaty activates Huitzilopochtli, and yes, Huitzilopochtli can obliterate the Abyss, but it also is pretty hazardous to life on Tibet. Now, we don't really know exactly how the real Bana met her end, but after she died, she seems to have become a sort of ghost that keeps Kokowi company. She doesn't remember learning the truth about the Jade, so she continues to search for it. So the traveler decides to help Bana find the Jade of Return, not realizing that she's actually a ghost. But searching for the Jade means finding some pyrophosphorite, because that's needed to navigate Natlan. Like I mentioned earlier, pyrophosphorite is basically dragon scales, and you need to place these dragon scales on the primal flame altars to make stuff move around. They're kind of like key cards or permits. But just collecting pyrophosphorite isn't enough. We also need to collect little energy fragments for Kokoweek in order to power him up so that he can help us reach Tonatia, because that is allegedly where the Jade of Return is supposed to be. It's only when we finally get there that we realize that there is no Jade of Return and Bana died hundreds of years ago. We do, however, find the second Golden Entreaty, but it is quickly stolen by Ochkan. That was extremely rude of him, so Kokoweek and the Traveler chase him down, beat the crap out of him, and follow his limp body into the Night Kingdom. And as he lay there dying once again, Kokoweek merges with the dragon and allows Ochkan to regain consciousness. Ochkan laments his failures, and in an effort to do one last good thing before he passes, he shares some of his memories with the traveler. And that's when we get to see the adventures that accompanied Bana's father, including familiar faces like Taidu and Legba. And we also get to see a conversation between Ochkan and Kukulkan from back when Ochkan was still king of Natlan. But while all this is happening to the traveler, Kukulkan pulls the little guy aside for a little dragon-to-dragon chat. One villain monologue about his motivations later, and he's gone. The traveler retrieves the second and final Golden Entreaty from Ochkan, then reconnects with their little buddy, and sets their sights on the sacred mountain of Talon. The entrance to the sacred city of Talon is through the mouth of the volcano, which means that we've got to climb up the whole mountain to get there, or take a shortcut, and then dive right into the volcano. Fortunately, that doesn't land us in a pool of hot magma, but a pitch-black room with a tiny mechanical dragon statue, a secret source servant that goes by the name of Ehekatl. Unsurprisingly, Kukulkan is actually the one piloting this body, as he does with basically all other dragon statues that we're going to run into. After activating the device that functions as a seal, the dark sleeping city becomes brightly lit and the gateway into it opens. Kukulkan instructs us to break the seal on the other two astral assemblages so we can activate the central axis and reach the heart of the city. There are only two of them, one in a pool of phlogiston and another atop a hill, so activating them doesn't take too long. After returning to the central pillar, we ride the celestial axis elevator down to Talon's lower levels, which have a lot more abyssal stuff mucking around that needs to be disposed of before we can reach the heart of the mountain. And we're also going to need to obtain a permit, because even abandoned cities need bureaucracy, I guess. The permit is obtained thanks to Kukulkan's guidance, and the traveler clears out the abyssal remnants with ease. There's not much left to do here except descend into the heart of the mountain so that we can finally remove the mark of the Flame Lord's blessing from our little Tepetla buddy, because that's what this whole journey has been for. But even the heart of the city is covered in abyssal corruption, so before we can really reach the actual heart of hearts, we need to purge the abyss from this too. So we unseal the astral assemblages scattered throughout the area, and they blast the abyss to Kingdom Come. This changes the entire landscape to a pale red region that looks eerily like half of a dragon's eye. There's also an altar where the pupil should be, and so that's where we offer up both Golden Entreaties, which is kind of funny because technically the Golden Entreaties weren't necessarily created from his whole eye, but just from his pupil. So we're offering up Shweekwaddle's pupil to an altar that's located in what appears to be the pupil. Anyway, the Golden Entreaties reveal a doorway into a new domain where the traveler is ambushed by a giant robot dragon and imprisoned in the same phlogiston prism that our little Saurian buddy was at the start of this quest. Kukulkan then reveals himself to the little guy, which causes the power of the Flame Lord within him to stir and then warps his body into that of an adult tepetlisaur. And then Kukulkan proceeds to tell us all the stuff that I have previously explained here in earlier parts of this video, so forgive me for not repeating it once again. At the end of his explanations, Kukulkan takes the little guy to Huitzilopochtli and asks him to make a choice. Will he activate the device and blend all life into one entity without any boundaries or suffering or abyssal threats? Or will he refuse to activate it and return to Natlan to seek out another path? If the little buddy activates Huitzilopochtli, the entire world is obliterated, recorded, and then written onto phlogiston particles, creating a world of pure white nothingness. A world without suffering, certainly, but it's also a world devoid of any meaning. A world where the little one becomes a sovereign, but lives a cold and lonely existence. And then the game just ends. So if you reload from your last save point and choose to find another path, then the little guy will tunnel his way back to the arena where the traveler was caught fighting the robot dragon and bust them out of their phlogiston prison. Together they defeat the robot, and miraculously, that's somehow all it takes for the Flame Lord's blessing mark to just lose its power. The mark is still technically there, but the power it once represented is gone for good. And I guess that's good enough. Kukulkan stays behind in front of Huitzilopochtli, reflecting on the little one's choices and noting just how similar they were to his own thoughts back when Xuequattl first proposed using Huitzilopochtli in the first place. He realizes that the reason he kept getting humans involved, whether it was by marking them as chosen of dragons or by having them raise his dragonborn son, was because he wanted to hold on to hope as long as he could. If someone else would make the same choice he once did, then perhaps he'd feel more secure knowing that it was the right choice to make. It is possible for humans and dragons to not only peacefully coexist, but to also work together to build a better world. If you manage to complete every single one of the little guy's mini quests, completing this quest will also trigger a special scene where the traveler, Paimon, and our little buddy take one last photo together before he finally says goodbye and sets off on his own adventure, while the traveler and Paimon reflect on their journey through Natlan and prepare for their next journey in Nod Krai. Now, I absolutely loved this questline. What a great way to teach us Natlan's history and give us some context for all those stories we get to read in weapons, artifacts, and books. But saying goodbye to the little one kind of feels like saying goodbye to Natlan. And, well, this will likely be my last Natlan video for a while, so I guess that feeling is pretty on point. So thanks for watching, everybody. Take care of yourselves out there, and I'm gonna see you all on our next big adventure. Bye-bye for now.